If you look back at every year of like college football coaching changes, you will see grades given out to the hires of who was a slam dunk, who was a mid hire. But we very rarely grade the firings. And so that's what we're going to do today on the Daily Huddle. We're going to grade the firings. Who should have gotten fired? Who got a raw deal in college football at this point? And there's still some coming. I think, like, literally, as I pressed record on this, Rick Stockstill at Middle Tennessee State got fired. So there are some changes still happening, but we're going to grade the firings today. I'm fully under the guise that we're going to embrace the grading of hirings later on down the line. And it's always fun to go back and look at those. I think a few years ago when you look at, I think it's 2018, that, like there were a lot of slam dunk hires, and there are not many of those dudes still left in their jobs. So we're going to look at the firings, who deserved to get fired, who got a raw deal. And that's today's episode of the Daily Huddle. So we're going to start in the Power Five. Who deserved to get fired, who didn't deserve to get fired. The openings right now, well, I guess not the openings, the firings that happened: Northwestern, Michigan State, Texas A&M, Mississippi State, Indiana, Houston, and Syracuse. Northwestern and Michigan State are kind of in their own separate little boat that they started early in the season, or in Northwestern's case, before the season, where you got Pat Fitzgerald and Mel Tucker got fired for improprieties. Those are kind of difficult to judge, but I gave Northwestern a B+ because, there's supposedly information out there, that evidence that Pat Fitzgerald had no idea that the hazing allegations that were happening inside his program were actually going on. And then other guys were like, this is the exact same things that happened when Pat Fitzgerald was coaching as an assistant and playing at Northwestern. He absolutely knew it was still going on. So there's conflicting reports there. So I give it a B+. You can't let that stuff happen in any form these days. You just can't let hazing be a part of your program. And even if you didn't know about it, it's your job to know about it. And that's a rough go of it for Pat Fitzgerald, but a B+. Michigan State, A-. Mel Tucker got fired for sexual impropriety against a sexual assault survivor who had been hired to educate Mel Tucker's players on how to treat women respectfully. There is conflicting evidence about whether she set Mel Tucker up. We're just going to skip it. If you have to err on the side of employing and paying millions of dollars to a potential sexual predator or not, I think you err on the side of not employing that guy. So A-. Texas A&M, Jimbo Fisher got fired. I'm giving it a B, the firing a B. I don't believe that Jimbo Fisher was going to lead Texas A&M to the promised land. I don't know who has the ability to lead Texas A&M to the promised land. I don't know who that is. I don't know if Mike Elko, who got hired, introduced today, I don't know if he's the guy that's going to turn A&M into the juggernaut, the sleeping giant that everybody says that it is. Generally, my thought when you call someone a sleeping giant is there's a reason they've been sleeping. But Jimbo Fisher wasn't going to be the guy to lead them to where they wanted to go. So I give the firing a B. Like, is it the right decision? Probably. There are those that would argue it should have been done 2 years ago. I don't know that that's the case. But I also don't know that you're going to, if you left him through the rest of this season and said, you need to make the college football playoff in 2024, no ifs, ands, or buts, I don't know that he accomplishes that. So it's one of those things that I've mentioned this before, that I think if you know you have to do something eventually, you have to do it immediately. So in this case, there are some extenuating circumstances in the financial categories that make that a little bit more difficult than you might want it to be. But I give the firing a B. At Mississippi State, Zach Arnett got fired after less than a season as the head coach, and I gave it a C- because I don't I don't think it was a great marriage to begin with, but I don't think Mississippi State was in a great situation from the get-go. When Mike Leach dies between the last game of the regular season and the bowl game, it's it's a sad thing for the entire sport, but then two, you don't get the like real great opportunity. Like it's pretty classless. It's tacky to go through a nationwide search at that point. So they hired somebody that was already got staff. It appears as if Zach Arnett wasn't prepared to be the head coach at Mississippi State. I guess he was, but he decided, hey, I'm going to change the way we do things here, and that didn't work out, and he got fired. Again, I don't know that there's a great, like there's not an A+ for Mississippi State to be found here. You were in a bad situation, and you did what you could to make a bad situation an okay situation as quickly as you could. But less than a year is rough. The guy got the bowl game last year into week 9 this year. That's not a great sample size of getting an opportunity to prove yourself, especially when, he didn't want to run the air raid offense that Mike Leach had operated before that. You need time to change things up to get things rolling the way you want them. I think that is a tough thing it's a tough spot to be in. But less than 1 year stinks. Indiana's firing, I give an A-. Tom Allen was 33-48 in 7 seasons. And I think a lot of those 33 come when Michael Penix Jr. is your quarterback. They had a nice run in 2020 where they were really good. But Indiana is a more difficult job than I think people give it credit for. But I don't know how great of a... I believe, and I've mentioned this before, there are just some schools that you have to do things differently at. That there are some schools that should embrace running the triple option, or before it was like the air raid used to be kind of the passing version of the triple option where you're just doing something completely different than everybody else is. And then like the smart people were like, wait, what if we did this with the best athletes in America? And things started to trickle aside. But at Indiana is one of those schools that I think every conference has one school that you don't have the resources, you don't have the recruiting base, you don't have the way to outspend your conference opponents. You got to do something different. And I think Indiana, and to a lesser extent, kind of Purdue, Northwestern, and the Big Ten, are those schools. If I'm Indiana, I want to hire Troy Calhoun or Jeff Monken or somebody similar to that that's going to come in and do something completely different off the wall that is going to bother other Big Ten coaches because they're not going to want to play us throughout the season. But I use a tough job. Tom Allen did the best he could. It's 33-48 in 7 seasons. Like, you got your chance after 7 seasons. So you got enough runway there to establish the program and the culture and all those other buzzwords that you want to use. You had that opportunity. You didn't get it done. That's okay. You can go be a defensive coordinator somewhere or a linebackers coach and do a great job. But 500, less than 500, 15 games under 500 isn't going to cut it at many schools over the course of 7 seasons. I don't think the expectations should be all that high at Indiana, but they should be slightly higher than that. Like, I think going 6-6 and making a bowl game should be like the minimum. And you could be 5-7 here and there, as long as you are, 7-5, 8-4 here and there as well. But I think it's an appropriate hire, or appropriate firing. Dana Holgorsen got fired at Houston, 31-28 during his tenure, and I give this a C+ just because. And I will reserve the right to come back and amend this later, because if Houston strikes quickly, that there was a report that like Gary Patterson is 100% in play at Houston. If Gary Patterson is the hire and he's hired by the end of the week, I reserve the right to turn this from a C+ into like a B+ or an A-, because if you operate with intent in your firing, that the only, like a few years ago when Texas, the only way they were going to fire Tom Herman was if they were going to hire Steve Sarkisian. I have no problem with that. If you operate with a plan, like Texas A&M, I gave a B. Jimbo Fisher probably deserved to be fired, but it certainly appeared as if they did not have a plan other than like, hey, we're Texas A&M. People are going to come out of the woodwork for this job. And they didn't. Shocker. And so you hire Mike Elko, who's a former assistant there. If Houston hires Gary Patterson by Thursday, I will say that this is not a C+ firing. It's a B+ firing or A- firing. If you operate with intent of guys that have winning records or have the ability to, I think, still coach them up and be, I think Houston could still be a pretty good program in the Big 12 under Dana Holgorsen, but Gary Patterson will probably do a better job there. So if that's what they do, I'm going to come back and change that from a C+ to a B+ or an A-. I reserve that right. But on the surface, I think it's like could one more year have helped? Yeah. And I think one more year could have put them in the same spot where in 2025 or 2026, they're like, oh, hell, we should have fired him in 2023. So I don't mind the striking while the iron's hot. But I think if that goes a quick coaching search where they definitely targeted one guy and they fired Dana Holgorsen with the idea that we are going to hire Gary Patterson or Jeff Traylor or Tom Herman, then okay, I don't have a problem with it. And the last Power 5 opening is Syracuse. Dino Babers, 41-55 in his tenure. Similar to Indiana, where you're basically a basketball school. You're in a tough recruiting base. I think they were patient, especially, he had a 10-win season a couple of years ago, but I don't think they were trending in the right direction. And so at that point, you're 41-55. You're 14 games under 500 after, I think, 8 seasons. Like, yeah, that's where you are, and that has to earn you a firing. The expectations shouldn't be grandiose at Syracuse, but again, making a bowl game every year should be kind of the bare minimum. And if you don't hit that, well, there's the door. So that's grading the Power 5 firing so far. I don't know how many more of those will trickle out here within the course of the next couple of days, just because signing day is going to happen. But then also, like, you're kind of at the mercy of hoping, praying, wishing that, maybe your guy doesn't get snatched up by somebody else, because that's what I think some of this, like, I think Houston fires Dana Holgorsen with the idea that there were a lot of people that thought Jeff Traylor was going to leave UTSA for Texas A&M. I don't know how real those possibilities were, but once he leaves Texas, once he doesn't get the Texas A&M job, you have to then be like, whoa, hey, wait a second. We think that guy is really good, and we want him to be our coach. Okay, sorry, Dana, you got to go. I think those situations happen and arise. In the group of 5s, Middle Tennessee State fired Rick Stockstill. I get it, truthfully. He just finished up his 18th season leading the program. He's 65 years old. He was making less than $1 million. 113 and 113 and 111 over the course of 18 seasons. They won 4 bowl games, had, I think, 10 winning records in 18 seasons. So it was good, but, it's probably time for a change, and that's understandable. Like, I get it. It just 18 years is a really long time for anybody at any program, but I think a change probably is needed. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him become a position coach somewhere, like be a quarterback's coach at a Power 5, or like a lower Power 5 school. Kind of just chill out, ride out the remaining years of his football coaching tenure. Boise State is kind of the big one here in the Power 5. Andy Avalos got fired after less than 3 years, which I find super interesting. He's 22-14 in less than 3 years, which obviously isn't up to their standard, but he's, one of their guys. He's a Boise State guy. And it's interesting that, and this is, I think, similar to Houston, except it's played out a little longer than I thought it would, that Boise State, if you fire Andy Avalos with the idea that you're either going to hire Brian Harsin or Kellen Moore, then that C+ goes to a A-. But it's taken a while, and that job's still open. So I don't know where they sit with potentially hiring Brian Harsin, or whether they, are going to try to hire Kellen Moore, the Chargers offensive coordinator, who played at Boise State. I think lost 3 games by like a combined 6 points in college, and they had like 5 missed field goals in those 3 losses. But if you're dumping a guy who's 22-14 for an NFL offensive coordinator, or a guy who had a lot of success previously coaching that program before he left for an SEC school, I don't think it's that big of a deal. But right now it's a C+. Like you fired a guy that was one of your own less than 3 years in when he had a winning record. Now, again, 22-14 is not up to Boise State standards, but I think the job that Chris Peterson did there and then got followed up by Brian Harsin, I think blinds people to the fact that it's a little tougher than I think the average fan thinks it is to win at Boise State. Kind of got to ride those JUCO recruiting trails a little bit. I don't think the NIL is all that great there. Facilities aren't spectacular at Boise State, and you are recruiting against some Pac-12 schools, some Big 12 schools. It's a little more difficult than people think it is up there at Boise. And then the final 3 group of 5s, I think all have something in common, that of the 10 most difficult group of 5 jobs that are out there, I think these 3 are probably solidly on the list. New Mexico is one of the toughest jobs in America. Danny Gonzalez was 11-32 in 4 years. Like, yeah, you're going to get a B+ in that firing. 11-32 is 11-32 over 4 years. Like it just is what it is. Despite how hard it is, 11-32 stinks. That's a rough record. Dana DeMel, 6 years at UTEP, 20-49. Sorry, you're going to get a B+. Like it makes a lot of sense to give somebody 6 years and they get you 20 wins in 6 years. Like, okay, you're not the right guy for us. You gave them their opportunity, and it's time to change, and that's okay. Terry Bowden, I think, at Louisiana Monroe, I gave him a C+ on the firing. He's 10-26 in 3 years. UL Monroe completely gets outspent by their competitors in the Sun Belt. Completely outspent. I think it's the lowest budget in America from a football spending perspective. And he's 10-26 in 3 years. I think he's got enough name cachet and enough guys that would want to coach underneath him that you could get that thing rolling in the right direction, but didn't necessarily get the greatest opportunity of all time to get rolling. So I give it a C-. I would have liked to see Terry Bowden get 1 or 2 more years at Louisiana Monroe before they come in and say, hey, you know what? You're not the guy for us. But again, of the probably 10 toughest G5 jobs in America, I think New Mexico, UTEP, and UL Monroe are on it. So to say that anybody could just show up there, no matter who the hot up-and-coming coach is, no matter how great of a coach you are, I don't know, if Nick Saban went to New Mexico, I think it'd still be a hot minute before they were really good. And I think that's just part of the situation that you get in that job. So I don't think it's out. I wouldn't be surprised if in 2027, 2028 coaching cycles, you see New Mexico, UTEP, UL Monroe open up again because somebody went 9-27 in their 3 seasons there or whatever. And the school's like, you know what? This isn't a great fit for us. I think that's kind of a revolving door. And that's where you sit. But those are the grades for the firings so far. We always grade the hires, but never grade the fires. So I wanted to grade the fires. There's some A's, some C's. I didn't give anybody a D or an F. You probably could have argued that, you probably could have argued that Houston, and again, I think it all hinges on who they hire, which isn't that kind of goes, it's the antithesis of the whole point of grading the fires. But could Boise State have been an F? Yeah, it could come back and be an F if they hire somebody you've never heard of that drives that program even deeper into the ground. It could be an F, and hell, we might revisit these at some point. But I think right now, yeah, it's a C+, but no Fs, no Ds. I think you can see a lot of reasoning behind every firing so far. There's not any just flat out head scratchers, at least to me. But that's just the way I see it. Want to know what you think? Hit us up in the comments here. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the great college football content we're pumping out here at Saturday Glory. If you are listening to the podcast, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping us get in front of more college football fans. That'll do it for this episode of the Daily Huddle. We're back at it tomorrow as the coaching carousel continues to turn here on the Daily Huddle on Saturday Glory.